Hi everybody and welcome to Elephant TV. Today I'll be speaking to Kawive Wambua. Mr. Kawive is a writer, is a poet, is a is a current deputy CEO of Inuka Kenya Trust. Kawive, karibu to the Elephant TV.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks. Very well. I'm keeping very well in this season of COVID-19. Just to get us started and just move the conversation forward. A lot has been said in the last couple of months around Corona and COVID and the response that civil society has responded to COVID-19. As an insider, in your view, how has civil society fared within this COVID-19 season?
Thank you. I think the first thing that we need to talk about is the frame of work of civil society. The basis of civil society work is around mobilizing and empowering or capacity building or educating citizens or doing advocacy around issues that relate to either groups or communities or the nation as such. So with the advent of Corona in March this year, that the basis for organizing shifted. The frame for organizing shifted. The space for organizing also changed. This change therefore necessitated the development or the adoption of new tools and new methods of doing things that logically had been planned for. Okay, so for instance, if we take the church for example, the church usually has got an annual calendar, and there are things that have been said. This was going to happen here. We're going to have this and that meeting, this and that kind of fair.
Right.
This was disrupted almost suddenly. Governance PSOs usually have got outreach activities in communities, and they depend on mobilizing people to venues and spaces where they hold discussions, going to work in communities and all that. This definitely was interrupted by COVID. So the challenge for civil society became, how do you get the same outputs? How do you get the same activities done? How do you get the same impact anticipated by the work that you're doing? How do you bring about change as desired with a changed environment? So was the one question. We are talking about a time when all planning and maybe even allocation of funds had already been done. Right. So this has to change very, very quickly. Most organizations that do advocacy, that do education, that do mobilization for social change, turned to media.
Right.
Either mainstream media, which is very expensive, like for instance, getting a radio show, to pay for a radio show to cover issues of our community is very expensive. But then in view of those prohibitive costs, most of them turned to media engagement or social media engagement, and also platforms for IT-based platforms for engagement, like Zoom, like Google Meets, and all that. To say, how can these be the spaces where we convene? But the biggest challenge with that became that there's a time in June or July where there was virtually a meeting or an event being organized on social media or on Zoom, on Meet, Google Meets, on all those platforms.
Right.
Every minute of the day. Mm. So it became a bit too much to deal with. And the biggest problem was that organizations have got spaces or places or areas where they work in. Now, if this organization is based in Mombasa, it couldn't go to Taita Taveta because there was a lockdown in Mombasa. Mm. So for the work, a way of communicating with those people. Now, the second challenge, apart from the glut, was that socialization of a huge part of the population of this country to these new forms, and therefore the supportive infrastructure, computers and smartphones and all that became a complication. Because, I mean, you want to reach 100 people in a village in Bondani, for example, or in a village in Kamasenkere. Usually on normal days, you would go there. You would have people mobilizing on the ground. You would invite the chief and all that. But now, so those people did not need to have a phone except to call them. But now they have to see live images on telephone. The supportive infrastructure of internet and all that became problematic. So there was a huge hit. And this actually hit more those organizations that entirely depend on physical organizing, especially the church, the mosques, the religious organizations, and trade unions, and workers unions. It got into a problem because congregation is in itself a tool. That you bring 1,000 teachers to Nairobi, that's a big statement. You are creating a sort of a wave. You are creating a potent situation that would be newsworthy and determine the voices. You can congregate the voices, and you can create or make a decision that works. Right. If we are talking about the church, every Sunday people have to meet to congregate into church. And apart from praying together, you also socialize people, you educate them on certain things. That the alternative was TV. And you know, the reach of TV is not that high. Right. And even then, the difference, of course, between media and physical is huge. You know, it makes sense to church. Because even the walking church in itself is a communal, it's a socialization process. You walk, you meet people, you talk to people. But now if you sit in front of a TV and look at bishop doing mass, you know, it's not the same thing. So organizing became quite problematic. And then of course, people sort of never got used to it, because some of the protocols were were used to exclude certain populations. Take, for example, the issue of people above 60 not being allowed to go to church, even when church and other spaces were open. Okay? Right. So what does that mean? It means that some of the people who are very pious, who have got a lot to pray for, either in tongues or whatever, were not able to access those spaces. And also small children. The thing for civil society, therefore, in Corona is that it had such a big impact. And also, most of the resources were also converted to helping people, citizens. Was converted to helping people who could not meet the needs in this time of Corona to better their situation. Right. Some of the things that happened also in civil society, especially the governance CSOs, right, that we need to know, is that new challenges emerged. Like for example, in Nairobi, there was the demolition of houses in some poor neighborhoods like Kariobangi.
Kariobangi, yeah.
And usually, civil society is on the front line of defending people's rights and all that. So it became very difficult to sort of manage that situation, manage that advocacy, because of the protocols that were set up. So you find that usually where civil society has been forcing government to the table to discuss, now here was government working with and operating with impunity, because the framing of the challenge was problematic. You know, so there is that also what we call demoralization. We call it like the space, the contested space shifted a bit.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. That's you've said a lot that I think we'll unpack moving forward. So, I mean, I like what you say when you say this, the space, the contest space has shifted. So, but then in your view, do you think it's a failure of the organizing principles of how society was constituted? Because as you're saying, it showed fissures in terms of how it organizes and how it relates with the people that it organizes around. So, in your view, do you think there was it's evidence of a gap in organizing or a type of organizing?
I think the kind of organizing that civil society has ever been using has worked for centuries, for a long time, and therefore people got used to certain things that are done in particular ways with a little creativity here and there. I mean, even the most potent advocacy actions have got a tradition of some sort. Look at the Black Lives Matter protest.
Right.
If you go back to the 60s, you'll find similarities with what's happening to them. Even if you look at the Arab Spring and the kind of thing that is happening about in some Eastern European countries, people coming together, congregating and saying, we are tired, we want to get change. There is a pattern. So this kind of, it has worked, and you can almost say it is a human way of expression and organizing and advocacy. But now the challenge with Corona is that it moved to the ground. Right. So that then, even for your own security, even for your own safety, it doesn't make sense to congregate. Okay? So when a government now takes that advantage and uses that time to do the things that it wanted to do anyway, which you had stopped it to do, then you are almost got flat-footed. And then secondly, it is sort of when you get something, when you get used to something, it also kills creativity. You are unable to think of new ways. And when these new ways were needed, the creativity could not come that quickly.
That fast, precisely.
For organizations, there was silence for about 2-3 months when people were thinking, how do we do this? How do we get this? People are working from home. You have Zoom meetings the whole day, and it doesn't work. So there was even fatigue among civil society workers, because now they're working in a different setup and they're working for long hours to achieve something that they achieve in 30 minutes in other spaces. Right. So it is just that the pandemic was different in that it even dictated certain forms and certain norms in socialization, right, which were first not anticipated, and then secondly, no scenarios had been built about if this happens, then how do we do? Maybe it's just the one question of history. We don't learn from history, from the Spanish flu coming up this way.
Right. Interesting. I mean, just to bring this conversation center. I mean, just back to civil society. I mean, there are those who argue that civil society post 2002, with the NAC wave and many forces that were then who were anti-Moi, either went silent or many went into government or the private sector. Hence, civil society post 2002 became very professionalized. It became this space of development partners, development workers, etc. And hence it lost verve. I mean, in your view, at what extent is this statement true? And how did we, I mean, from 2002 to now, then how has society fared? Because in today's context, this context of particularly in Kenya, for instance, where we're talking about the BBI report on one hand and reggae, on the other hand, we're talking about the hustler narrative, etc. And it's almost as if we're caught up in this binary, because the spaces of contest and terrain of struggle have all been co-opted by the political class, such that there isn't any other space within society for any kind of discourse. So I don't know what are your thoughts on this?
First, I would like to say that 2002 was an important year for this country and for civil society. The expansion of civil society in the 90s, from just a few organizations, and even the religious sector was not organized in terms of various formations coming together to form organizations or unions had not been there. Except, for instance, the ecumenical center, which brings NCCK and the Catholic bishops and everybody together, was formed in 1999. So there has been a move towards towards organizing from the early 90s towards 2002. And why this was important was because 1991 repeal of Section 2A allowed that kind of freedom of association and enhanced advocacy, so to speak. It was the first year out of the dictatorship of Kenyatta and Moi regimes. So from that period until 2002, there's something that was common that the civil society wanted, and that thing was a change in the system of government. Okay, so there was multi-party in 1992, but multi-party did not bear fruit because the single party continued to dominate.
Right.
So the conceptualization of multi-party was, can other players become active and sort of not just become active, but also get into the space of political leadership? Yeah. So that happened in 2002.
Right.
Now, the government that came into place in 2002 was so popular, the civil society had adopted it earlier on, a year before.
Right.
Okay? Both the religious sector, people's workers' unions, and civil society governance, CSOs, everybody had adopted that kind of system. It was basically like everybody had come together to say, can we just finish this bit? So it doesn't matter that the politicians on the other side were bad. That was not the point. The point was, we want a change, we want to get it. What happened in that time is that people were not ready for what would come a year later. Nobody had known that Kibaki and his regime would turn against the constitution. Remember one of the very clear messages were, we'll give you a constitution in 100 days.
Yes. One of the
promises. Nobody knew that it would turn against that promise.
Right.
So we can say, for example, that after 2002, there was 1 or 2 years of transition. And that is the difference between what I'm saying is different from what you are saying people say. Because the prominence of civil society actors in the 80s and in the 90s was that in 2002, when these people joined the government, people said civil society had joined the government. But that is the difference between the leadership of some of the leadership of the civil society joining government. Actually, a majority of them, if we were to speak the truth, joining government that time, does not mean there was a gap in the work of civil society. I remember in 2004 and 2005, civil society waged perhaps the biggest advocacy platform against the government. The Yellow Movement was born in 2004 and grew in 2005, and it won, in my view, the constitutional battle of 2005 against the government. It was the Yellow Movement, remember, that gave birth to ODM.
Right.
Okay? So that was the work of civil society. So civil society had not gone. Civil society has kept focused on the agenda of good governance. The only difference was when civil society became famous in the 90s, there were particular people to whom that tag was apportioned. So it was Kivutha Kibana, it was Willy Mutunga, it was Gedongo, it was those people who were coming out to give an alternative view to the singular KANU voice of the government. Right. You remember?
Yes.
So being called civil society and being called an activist was almost like an anti-government thing that time.
Right.
So that tag was given to particular people. And when these people got out of the civil society space or got into government, so everybody, the question of perception, everybody said civil society has gone to government.
Right.
So the civil society has died.
Has died, absolutely.
That narrative has not changed. It is the same one you are saying now, because I don't think it's true. Don't let that some people who were the face of civil society got out of the space. Absolutely. They went to a different space. And now civil society from that time, even until now, is judged on the basis of the actions of those people.
Right.
So if now they support a process now, people say even civil society is supporting.
Is supporting the process.
It is the case of an extended metaphorical reference. It started here when it was true, and then when things changed, it still continued as a reference outside the scope of its reference. So this is something that you have to think about clearly. And there are new people who came into the civil society, new leaders. There was a lot of work that was done in 2007, 2008 by civil society actors. There was the Katiba Sasa campaign that was carried out in 2010. From 2008 to 2010 on the Constitution. And you remember even when the Constitution was being passed, it was Katiba ni sasa na kama si sasa ni sasa. That was a society mantra, but it was adopted by everybody. Yes. So civil society has been providing thought leadership in this country across. It's only that the people who carried the tag of civil society when civil society was popular and was very different from the other narrative, because the other narrative was the government narrative. That is what has remained. But then thirdly, and which is important, is that the narrative that civil society carries has also been radically transformed. Transformed in this way that politicians know the power of civil society. They know the power of civil organizing. They know the power of the church and of the faiths, the Muslims
and the unions.
They know that power. So they pander to it. If for instance you look at what was happening in the BBI bombers
relaunch of the second report.
Was it a launch? I didn't see any.
It was a relaunch.
Okay. What was happening there? Half of the people were quoting Quran and the Bible because they are pandering to religion. They want to say, this is how to organize. But you remember, even in the 90s and 90s, and a lot in the early 2000s, the church and the religious sector and the civil society were very clear that their agenda is not the agenda of politicians. But now politicians have appropriated that agenda. Okay. And then also the question that our society is becoming more open. So there are more spaces for people to interact and all that. So the civil society notion that there are particular people called civil society, there are particular groups called civil society, or there are particular things you say when you are civil society has been decentered. So that's the reality we have to deal with. And then the reality of e-organizing.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is a new way of organizing, which is a novel and trendy way, which people don't associate with civil society as we know it. Right. So civil society has metamorphosed and morphed into new forms.
New forms.
Let me tell you where the problem is. There are some people who are exposed to the values, because civil society is value-based, whether it is the church, it is trade unions. There are a set of values, and one of which is good governance, one of which is ensuring that you protect the people from the excesses of government. Right? There are some people who have moved from that space of protecting citizens to the other space of being in government, and have performed poorly than those people who were unapologetic government functionaries.
Right.
That is where the narrative comes from. But otherwise, I don't think so.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for that clarification. I mean, which is you've talked about a good governance, and in a sense, Kenya is in a democratic transition, and whereby where post 2010 constitution, there's been quite a number of gains in the democratic space, and almost if just like countries like in West Africa, where we're moving to other transition whereby we can now say we are clearly democratic society. However, right now as we speak, many could argue that there's also a contest for taking us back to the anti-democratic times where autocracy, imperial presidency, etc. And unfortunately, that conversation within the political class, one can argue, is still, on both sides, within the political class, the forces therein are all anti-democratic. So my question is that in this very, 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 very key time in our society, how should society organize the people? What organizing principles should it use to organize the people? And what broad-based platform and ideals should it get people to organize around, to be able to, so such that Kenya can make that democratic transition?
I think the question of organizing citizens to make a democratic transition is something that has been going on for a long time.
Right.
The issue for me is that what constitutes a democratic transition and what constitutes the pathway to a democratic transition has changed. Yeah. Of course, right now, even now, the value of democracy as an organizing principle of governance is being questioned in many areas. People are saying that democracy has failed to create an equitable society, a society where people enjoy same or rights in a particular way. So all those things are being questioned. But back to your question and this country, and saying what should civil society do to secure the democratic transition, or the transition to a democratic. I don't know which one you mean, but I'll answer for both. That what is referred to as a democratic culture is where there is freedom for expression, for association, the freedom, and where is responsibility, which responsibility is tied to the freedom, and where there is equitable sharing of resources, and there is participation of citizens in the management of affairs of the state. I think that is the space where we need to know, where everybody feels human, feels appreciated, feels wanted, and has got an equal opportunity to participate in making decisions for that state. Now, for our case in this country, you realize that space, that whole space, is occupied by various formations of political actors.
Right.
So you find that the person who is making very progressive pronouncements about where they want to take this country is a politician. Apparently, the other person who seems to be against those positive pronouncements is a politician.
Right.
So as a country, we have been caught in the crossroads of political contestation.
Right.
Okay? So how many times have politicians been banned from religious gatherings? Very many. They are banned today, they are unbanned tomorrow. What happens? It's because, number one, even if you consider it, they are still human beings and they have a right to be religious. And if they go to a space and they are asked to speak, you cannot gag them from articulating things that even them, they don't see as politics, but it is picked up as politics. That is number one. Number two, unfortunately, and this is very unfortunate, the mainstream organs of transmission of information and knowledge, the media, have in a way either been owned, aligned, or dedicated, so to speak, if I can't find a better word,
right,
to particular political persuasions. They are not ideologies. No, they are not ideological.
Yeah.
They are just group think and interest. Yes. So much so that then the narrative being driven by political actors has become the dominant narrative.
Exactly.
Like today, I was saying in another space that you can't talk about BBI without either being labeled as supporting Ruto or supporting Uhuru and Raila.
Yes.
You know, it's not a poisoned conversation. So whatever position you take, there you take the objective position. Both parties will disown you because you are not behaving, you are not fitting in the certain prism that has been created for you. So I would say for the longest time, especially since 2005, because in 2005 it was very clear that it was everybody else against the government. The government came with the Wako draft and they said, we will put this down your throat because we are government. That is why it lost, by the way.
Yeah.
But everybody else said, why can't we reason? Why can't we have a conversation? Why do you want to go and sit and change the draft from bombers to be what you want and you don't want us to participate? Even if we are wrong, can you listen to us? Can we even influence a comma in the document? So that's one of the reasons why it's a question of attitude. But now from that time until now, politicians have straddled the whole space. So if you want to get a naysayer to what the government is saying, that person will be a politician. Okay? If you want to get somebody who is supporting the government, that person will do it from a political standpoint. Okay? Not a technical standpoint.
A political standpoint.
So what has happened is that now the narrative creation, perpetuation, and amplification has been taken over by political actors in all aspects. They control our economy, they control the production of goods and services, and they control the rules around labor and around relations. So that's the problem that. And therefore, my own opinion is that going forward, the best thing that civil society can do, the religious sector, trade unions, and everybody. But before I go there, let me tell you what that impact of politicians straddling the landscape has had on society. Right. It has made the civil society either to be labeled and to carry around the label, or to play up to these interests. Like, for instance, KOTU was one of the strongest trade unions. Where is KOTU today? The face of KOTU is a political mouthpiece. Okay?
Right.
The same may not be said of the religious sector because they are not homogeneous. But you find certain certain religious leaders have taken particular positions.
Precisely.
Which are not necessarily religious positions, but they are social positions and they have a right.
Yes.
But they take positions that are interpreted as political positions. Okay? So now the civil society faces condemnation if they do politics. and they face condemnation if they keep quiet, and they are at risk of being irrelevant for doing nothing. Okay.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Huh?
And another thing arose that if you go and say something that is against the government narrative, then very quickly the government has got what we call bots, robots who just attack you on the point of like, you're doing this to please donors, you're doing this to get the money, and once you get the money, then you keep quiet. So that the legitimacy of what you have said is not discussed. The credibility of what you have said is not discussed. So what is discussed is why you are saying it, which is because you have donor funds to do this and all that. Okay? And that is the reason why, for instance, PBO Act has never been, because the PBO Act places civil society at the center of political and social organizing. That's one of the reasons that it has never been. That's one of the reasons that it has never been enacted from 2013 when it was passed until today. But that's a story for another day. So what I was saying earlier is that where now civil society, the church, and by that I mean the faiths, Muslims, Hindus, everybody that's and traditionalists who are represented here, and the governance CSOs and other CSOs or public benefit organizations, and the trade unions and other unions of people. What they need to do is to organize to control the narrative. And for you to control the narrative, you have to organize to replace the current political shenanigans with a new set of politically active individuals who can humanize and de-robotize, if there is such a word, to remove the robots from the political narrative. Because now Kenya has been riding on empty rhetoric throughout. People are arguing, you don't know what they are arguing about. And when they are arguing, their children get accidents together coming from drinking sprees. You get what I mean?
I get what you mean.
So it's like the enmity discourse has been a discourse to keep us confused. So you support so and so. No, they are fighting. But in actual fact, they are not. They are collaborating in making deals, in growing their own wealth. But there is we are left out in terms of the deliberations on how to share that wealth. Okay? So that should be the new organizing principle. How do you replace the political empire? Because what we have now, and as we go towards 2022, it will get a binarism. There will be this side and that side.
And that side.
But on this side, there are wolves. On this side, there are wolves. Some are yellow, others are green. But they are wolves. So the choice we will have is which wolves will eat us, the green ones or the yellow ones.
Or the yellow ones.
But the choice of being eaten has not been taken away. So we will end up being eaten anyway. So why can't we replace the wolves? Because one, the politics of Kenya have lacked clear ideological stand. There is no clarity in which ideology we follow as a country.
Right.
So if we develop that clarity in ideological stand, and we are able to politically organize to take power, because the constitution provides a means of getting power in this country.
Right.
And we don't want to do unconstitutional things or to organize outside the constitution.
Yeah.
But you can organize people. It may not be 2022, but it may be a process that begins now with an aim of populating the political space with people of conscience. Because even those that came from civil society, they go in there, they behave badly, they disappear very quickly. Where did Mutava Museni go? And you go all the way to the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. But somehow in between, he kept quiet. And he's not old, he has not retired. Yeah. And I'm just giving him, because he was very prominent in the church, in the religious sector. And then he also got to be very prominent in Parliament. But maybe he's quiet because of his conscience? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. So we need to get a point where we start organizing to get political power, not because we want political power, but so that we can correct the narrative of this country.
Right.
Yeah.
Which brings to my very final question. I mean, even as society organizes this, because when I hear you say, what rings to my mind is actually then we have a crisis of the public sphere. So then, how does civil society act as? How do you reconstruct the public sphere such that in itself it's able to produce a progressive kind of political philosophy or philosophies that endear to progress of the people? How do we reconstruct the public sphere?
First, as a nation, we have to admit that there are a number of problems. Number one, our education system sort of has de-emphasized the need for the study of the arts, history, literature, culture-related subjects, social ethics. So basically, we have, and this has been said by even the political actors, people saying that arts and sciences, and this has been drummed in our children. You know the reason? It is these subjects that develop character. It is this subject that develop values. It is this subject that develop the ability to do critical analysis on the social space. So one, the teaching of those subjects, and for the purposes of getting a good Kenya back on its feet, is to say, how do we rewrite some of the things that are wrong? For example, the way history has been captured and taught in our school is wrong. How do we make that right? How do we liberalize KICD? That is number one. And then number two is to get so many people in the political space, so that then, because now the form of organizing is political, we beat the system by getting our people in it. Okay? So if you have got 20 MCS in a 30 ward county, 20 MCS who have got a human rights, for instance, education and outlook, it is clearly very difficult to do draconian laws in that space. Why? Because there will be 20 voices standing up to be counted, even if it is moral, even if they will stand on principle. And that will mean that we are able to crowd out the bad elements. These bad elements have to be crowded out. Because the other option is not desirable, is not constitutional. Getting them out of the space by force is not constitutional. And then the other way of writing it is to get a national conversation. A national conversation that is led by other people and not politicians. If the religious sector, if the civil society, governance, CSOs and others, if the unions can get together and lead a national conversation, and we make sure that the politicians don't come in there. Let me tell you, Ufungamano initiative, the NCC, NCA in 1997, died because politicians came in. And these people were very clear that we want to convert this meeting to a constituent assembly to discuss the constitution for this country. But politicians were called off by Moi, and they went to Kasarani to do IPPG. The initiative was lost. Okay? In 2005, when politicians joined the Yellow Movement, the initiative lost direction and became a political party and went, and the civil society actors remained behind because they couldn't get into that brazenness. Okay? So the 2010 constitutional discussion and moment was also very good until politicians went to Naivasha. They appropriated the process and they went to Naivasha and they put in clauses, very innocent looking clauses in the constitution, but which were to protect their interests. So if we can have a national conversation that does not include the politicians, so that we can even talk about them, because now you can't talk about a politician. They own the radio, they own the TV, so you talk about them how? Yeah? And we have that conversation as a nation and say, how do we right the wrongs that we have done? How do we ensure that we are able to get ourselves, our act as a country together? I think that would be really, really, really critical. But now when you start a national conversation, the same politicians will come in as very good people, but before long, they will puncture the process. Okay? Yeah.
Wow. However, I'd like us to, I'll definitely want to bring you back. And there's a lot to unpack, but because of just for the sake of time and for our viewers, I think we leave it at that. So thanks so much for sparing a moment to talk to Elephant TV.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Be well.